For the last at least 40 years, thousands of children in Britain have been subjected to grooming, rape, and various sexual and violent abuse, under the watchful eye of authorities and politicians who were just too keen to look the other way. Politicians because they were busy mopping up the Muslim vote, and police for fear of being called racist. This is because the vast majority of perpetrators are from Asian, mainly British Pakistani background, and this we know as a small fraction of the larger problem have been convicted. Now, arguing that diversity is our strength, the British Prime Minister has yesterday dismissed calls for a wider investigation as a far-right bandwagon and blamed Elon Musk for shining light on this issue.
And of course, the issue here is that in the last 40 years, when the first instances occurred, the media were not as free as they are today. Today, for example, we have Elon Musk, which is campaigning and championing free speech on X, on social medias. And of course, here in Britain, there is a new news channel with for the first time, with a bent to the center-right, conservative bent politically. And it's been doing investigation in the issue for the last couple of years. One of the journalists, Charlie Peters, actually been doing very serious investigation, all-style investigation. He's a young guy with an old journalist soul who's been doing incredible good work and digging in this issue. So welcome to the reality show. Today we're joined by Anders and Alejandro. Hi, guys. Anders, I'd like to come to you first because you are in the United States. How have you heard about this issue going on? Are you aware of what's been going on in Britain for so long?
Yeah, I am. Now, I don't know if I'm an outlier in terms of reading news and so on and so forth, but it has been pretty well publicized here, and not just now since Elon started to highlight this, and it's been about 6 months almost, or 5-6 months when he first started to tweet about this. So I did know about it, and actually just this morning or yesterday there was an article in the Free Press, which is one of the new shining stars on the American, or I guess worldwide news scene. They had an article about it as well. So I was aware of it. Obviously, it's horrifying what's been going on for so long. As you mentioned initially, the politicians want to sweep it under the rug, and the police are afraid of being called racist. One question I have for you guys in Britain is, in the police force, is there also a significant element of employees from those racial groups, from the Pakistani community, for instance, that have further kind of prevented the police from looking into this? I don't know if there are such dynamics involved here as well.
Oh, well, let me take that question straight head on just before I come to Alejandro, if I may. I think that aspect of it that you're asking there at the end is more true in the political sphere and in those politicians within local government and those kind of civil service positions than it is in the police as such. I think the police are far more subject to a fear of being called institutionally racist, regardless of the makeup of. So it's less a cover-up from within the investigative people trying to suppress their own communities, activities within the police. Although I do think that is more so the case, much more so the case in the local politicians and area. But those are broad statements. It doesn't mean that they don't cross over as well. But in the main, I think that would be the best summary I could give you of it. And I think it's important to state that although this is, in a sense, old news, in that it's been known about as a problem for some time, and many people have spoken about it for some time, it is being brought to light now once again, and it is an existing problem. So there's by no means are we talking about a problem which is solved and no longer happening right now across many cities in the UK. And that is what makes this, such a necessary and vital problem to discuss and to actually, action some of the measures necessary to ensure that it is brought to an end. Alejandro, your first thoughts on the topic in general?
Well, I think it's horrendous. I think overall, I want to start my opinion today with two things. First of all, is the sad reality that we, and certainly in very few voices have been spreading out, the fact that what we called 10 or 20 years as political correction, now it has become labeled as woke and so on, that the initial facade that such ideologies had was that they were aimed to make us better, to promote peace, to increase the security amongst all of us. What you actually see in these reports is that when confronted between the option of really promoting peace, really promoting justice, really caring for people who have been subject to really awful stuff, and being called a racist, not because you are being racist, but just because you're prosecuting people of a very specific background, you prefer not to prosecute these people. This is one tumbler less in the dissection of the political correctness / woke ideology that has been breaking up over the last years. The second thing has to do with probably the most tragic thing, and that's the only people that have been talking about this is people of what we call the far right, and people which I think are detestable, people which I don't want to be associated with, first of all. But what is interesting here is related to an anecdote that I have when I came to the UK for the first time. I thought that now that I had changed country and I really like the country, I thought about buying a St. George's Cross flag, and I was told by one person, "Hey, don't buy one, and especially don't flag it or show it over, because here only the racist people are the ones who use that flag." And I don't deny that only the racist people are the ones using that flag. But why on earth have English people allowed that to happen? There are people who love the country and really are willing to wave the flag without being called racist, and who aren't racist. Here is the same. Why on earth haven't good, willing people, like what English people are usually about, like justice caring, intelligent people, why haven't raised their voice and spoken about this horrendous injustice that we're seeing today?
Well, the problem is exactly then the few people who raised the issue in the past. There's a particular MP who used to be the mother of an MP who's now a lord, who was an MP in East London. She actually started to say this in the 80s, early 80s, 70s, early 80s, saying there is an issue here with Muslim gangs. And she was shut down as a racist. I mean, she was in the Labour Party. She was a lefty MP who spoke up, and she was shut down. And since then, people were shut down deliberately by the media and by the politicians because of the sensitive nature of the issue. To say that there is a problem would have been admitting that the multiculturalism these people were waving the flag about was a failure. The integration didn't occur, and actually rotten cultures like the Islamism and this kind of stuff were actually taking hold in British society. And everybody who raised the issue, who's been raising the issue, is raising the issue, as the Prime Minister showed yesterday, is labeled as far right. And the Prime Minister yesterday, the bag of potato, charmless man, man with no ideals and ideas, is labeling people who raise the issue, who ask for a proper investigation, is labeling them as far right people, who jump on the bandwagon. So yeah, there was an issue in the past that the St. George's flag, the flag of England, was hijacked by a very small group of dumbasses on the far right. But it's been kind of reversed. People now feel that they can reappropriate the symbols of the nation, both the Union Jack and the St. George's flag, if anything else, because there is a push from the other nations to chant their own independence. But yeah, that's been an issue which has been tackled now by the presence of free media, and is probably going to be the thorn in the side of the Labour government, who, by the way, is the party which was in charge in every single location where these events were occurring. So there is complicity here between politicians and local criminals. Politicians, as Richard pointed out, because they are taking advantage of the Muslim vote, which is becoming a more and more a big issue here in Britain.
Yeah, just on the flag quickly before I move back to the story itself. The flag behind us that you can see here is the Union Jack. That's for the whole of Britain. I think what Alejandro was talking about more there was the England one, the red cross on the white background, and of course that's got a lot, that has had in the past associations with football hooliganism. Unfairly to some extent. I mean, there was obviously a period when football hooliganism was sadly a big thing. Less so these days, thankfully, than before. And that associated that also associated with the kind of attitude that Alejandro was highlighting there from the person he spoke to, what had given it over to those kind of people, and it's only recently that it started to be considered less controversial, let's say, which is an appalling way to behave. And even the Union Jack behind me, Labour in the recent elections has suddenly been plastering all of their leaflets in the Union Jack when they themselves were reluctant to use it all over the place and were quite sneering about it and sneering about Britain generally, of course. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things from the chat. Thank you first to PC for the super chat, who mentions the worst PM ever in the form of Keir Starmer, and of course he's not wrong there by many ways. And of course the accusation that this is two-tier Keir, which is one of the labels that's used to him, it is often applied on the basis of whether the law is applied equally depending on the racial and ethnic makeup of the perpetrators of crime. And of course, we should mention, of course, that prior to becoming Prime Minister, Keir Starmer used to be the head of the Criminal Prosecution Service. And some of that was during the period we're talking about, sort of 2008, for a few years after that. So a lot of the accusations, and some of this is a distraction, I believe, but a lot of the accusations are as to whether the Crime Prosecution Service actually pursued enough of the cases. Now that may be partly the case, but this is not a story about Keir Starmer. And many people would like to make this story about a certain individual, whether that's Keir Starmer, whether that's Elon Musk, whether that's Tommy Robinson, for example, or Nigel Farage. There's a big desire to discuss an individual and all of the things related to an individual, as opposed to the issue we're talking about and the principles involved. And that's definitely what you've seen going on quite a bit. Somebody's questioned in the chat, so I'll just clarify. Charlie Peters, is this the guy you mentioned from GB News? Yes, he is from GB News. You're absolutely right there. And there have been some heroes in the course of the reporting of this. One such is Maggie Oliver, who was a former detective constable in the Greater Manchester Police. And one particular area where this was where this grooming rape scandals, we really ought to call them, because they were gang rapes. They were the kind of crimes we're talking about are generally white girls. They can be as young as 11 years old, taken off the streets, many of them in social care or those kind of very low level income, who are often were around the streets. They were taken by these Asian gangs and gang raped in front of friends so that they would keep quiet, given heroin, and drugs and alcohol applied with alcohol. Sometimes there's the odd one that was even set on fire with petrol and burnt with cigarettes, those kind of things. Heinous crimes and horrendous stuff we're talking about. But that's just to give you a flavour of it. I don't really want to go further into details necessarily, but just to give you an idea of what the kind of things we're talking about. So just to clarify, this woman I mentioned, Maggie Oliver, former detective constable in one of these towns that was dealing with Rochdale, which was one of the towns where this was a big issue. She resigned from the police force in order to become a whistleblower about the extent to which these crimes were not being covered, reported on, and pursued right through the courts. So I want to get to where we're at now, in a sense, because a lot of what's being talked about at the moment is reports. It's whether there should be inquiries and reports. Now, there have been different inquiries on some of these different towns. They're not only northern towns, by the way. I should mention they're towns that include places like Oxford as well, not just your Rochdales, Rotherhams, Manchester, Birmingham, those kind of places, but even places like Oxford. A lot of these, when it comes to inquiries, they've had individual inquiries, but some of those have had a number of problems with them, either from being too narrowly focused, too isolated on a certain town only, or a certain brief period of time, or they've been run by the very people who are accused or potentially complicit in the cover-up of the crimes anyway. If you give the local council, who also control social services and the kind of services that the young girls would have been under in the first place, the need to investigate themselves as to what happened in these respective towns, then you are unlikely to necessarily to get to the truth if they're going to end up exposing themselves as being part of the problem. And in terms of what you've seen about the reporting of how this is brought to light and what the investigations should do from here in terms of highlighting the problem officially and, of course, determining what action should be taken. What are your thoughts on those kind of areas?
Well, what exactly the action should be, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the British justice system and such, only that obviously some action should be taken to try to address this. One dramatized TV series that was aired here in the US not too long ago was Mr. Bates against the post office, or something similar, about a post office scandal in Britain that went on for 20 years. And I think that, I mean, there are not exact parallels, but I think it's a good illustration of the Kafkaesque environment we're talking about here. So whomever is starting these investigations or whatever it is, as you say, it's the same people who have been involved all along. So what are the chances of success? I'm not sure, and I don't know how you would really structure it to ensure that this issue was addressed once and for all. But I think as objectivists, it's important for us to remember that this is a logical consequence of a welfare state, where you have a government that is involved in everything and who is focusing its priorities on the areas that a limited government wouldn't, or they are not focusing their priorities on the areas that a limited government should focus on. Because if something like this happened in a capitalist society, it would be nipped in the bud very, very quickly. Let me put it that way. And obviously, politicians, we know from Ayn Rand's essays that she describes how it becomes a warfare between pressure groups. And that's exactly what we see here, whether you don't want to offend these minorities that are an important political constituency for you, and so on and so forth. So all of what we're seeing is I would say, a direct consequence of a welfare state that doesn't have its priorities, doesn't have its morality right, because obviously it goes even deeper to that, and that is the morality of altruism, that is basically preaching that need goes before whatever it is that it goes before. So I think it's important to keep that in context when we talk about what should be done, because quite frankly, even though I hope action will be taken here, I'm not sure about the success rate, what it will be under this welfare state system that we're living under. And I mean, this applies to Britain, it applies to all of Western Europe, where grooming is, I mean, grooming is a problem at least all over the Western world. It takes different expressions. Online grooming is probably the one that is most talked about here in the US, but it's all over, and it's the same, similar symptoms, but the same underlying cause.
Yeah, and of course, you know, we've seen these kind of problems all over Europe. From 2010, for example, when the big immigration wave started, we've seen happening in Germany, we've seen happening in Sweden, we've seen happening in France. So this is a widespread issue. But here in Britain seems to be, we seem to have started much earlier on because of our, you know, people from the Commonwealth settled here in Britain. So cultures that came from, you know, Asia or, you know, those kind of areas settled here much earlier on than in Europe. And in a way, we are, in a bad way, we've learned our culture as assimilated, rather than assimilating them, our culture as assimilating this aspect. And as I mentioned earlier on, the sinister thing is that we've allowed this kind of behavior to occur. I mean, when we're talking about there is an issue in society, is Daniel, you have a list of names. Can you share it, please? Because these are the names of the people who went to trial and have been convicted, people who've been found guilty in each of these towns. And this is just a sample of the people who were involved and a sample of the towns where this is spreading. So it goes from, you know, from Bristol all the way to Newcastle. So the whole country has an issue. And as you see from the name, most of the names are from a background, Islamic background. So these kind of cultures are perpetrating this kind of primitive morality that they've imported to Britain, and they never grew out of. They never decided, okay, you know, we should civilize.
And I think we ought to mention in the course of this, there were mainly white girls who were the victims of this, but not entirely. And many of the victims were, or some of the victims were also from Sikh or Hindu backgrounds as well. And the element of this that's crucial to understand is that the perpetrators of these crimes saw these other religions and other races as inferior and as meat. Quite literally meat by some of their own wording sometimes. So and that's what's been on sadly on display. I just wanted to thank Bullmoose for the super chat. Bullmoose says the Labour government seem to be pushing policies that literally oppress the native population. Do you have any idea what their long-term intentions are? Well,
personally, I don't think they have an intention. I don't think they have, beyond pushing altruism, pushing the fact that any other culture is better than the native culture. I don't think they actually have an end game as such. My result in, you know, making a certain sector of the population, which is now in a majority, in a minority, but that is going to be just a byproduct of the stupid policies they're pushing. I think what they've been doing, they've been hating success. We've seen, you know, from the budget lately, we've seen from the policies that it's all about punishing success, punishing the people who produce, highlighting the virtue of the people who really parasitize on society. Really, if you are living on benefits, you're considered on welfare. You're considered better than a person who's making money. And in Britain right now, making money is the worst thing you could do. People will sneer and hate you for being successful. And that's part of the culture that the Labour Party, starting mainly with Tony Blair from 1997, they've been pushing the scandal ideology. That's why we are in such a dire strait now. This is the chickens coming off to roost after so many years of this kind of socialist culture of envy.
And frankly, I don't want to let the Conservatives off the hook either in the course of this. They've been in power for the last 14 years. Many of the things that they're talking about now, they could have been done themselves, although they've introduced things like a grooming gang task force in like 2023 under Rishi Sunak, which has already brought about 500 odd people to be arrested at least, and to be brought through the justice system in the immediate future. That is a step in the right direction. But this is, this is at the end of a long period when this has been going on continually. So, I mean, Alejandro, do you have any thoughts either on what Bull Moose asked there about the long-term intentions of the people towards the attitude of the native population?
I don't think that there's an ultimate goal as such. I think they are reactive, and you are giving too much power or agency to people like in the Labour Party. They're so incapable of dealing with each other, let alone with their own constituencies. How on earth could they push for something? They're like closer to amoebas reacting to you touching them or twitching them than anything else. This is a byproduct of the culture that we have in, and Labour Party isn't trying to institute it or to break it apart. I would say that's more that could be the case with the more intellectual of the MPs, and as well with almost 90% of people that read and write in the Guardian and like parties and. But the Labour Party, I don't think that they are having this kind of conspiracy or aim to do anything else. Now, maybe and also as a caveat, I didn't mean to imply in my previous comment that in everyone that uses an England flag is racist. Maybe in my wording I said something like that. But I don't mean that. But yes. Now, and just maybe to conclude this is related to the previous comment that you had made. What should we do right now? What should we try to do to sort out this kind of issue? First of all, we should try to remember that this is, first of all, an ongoing issue, and therefore we should be more aware, more hesitant to any kind of things that it's said to us, and we should be very pressing to both the police and our politicians that these grooming gangs are taken apart as quickly as possible. But also, it's a matter of being very reflective about the things that went wrong, and I think this will be more important than anything. Just maybe as a brush, let me quote from the Telegraph article from 4th of June, 4th of January of this year. In a paragraph, they quote that in Rotherham, a senior police officer told a distressed father that the town would erupt if the routine abuse of white children by Pakistani heritage men became public knowledge. Then, in the same paragraph, it states, the father of a 15-year-old rape victim was told the assault might mean she would, quote, learn her lesson. Now, these kind of things, if treated properly, would make the well-meaning police very aware of what happens in the future. And hopefully, if this thing is, if we are able to devise good institutions to prevent these kind of things, we will be able, so that there's proper institutions so that police who want to change things and people who want to change the conditions of the victims have the means to do it. Can that happen today? I'm skeptical of that, but we cannot stop pushing for that.
Yeah, personally, I think the biggest scandal, I mean, despite these horrific events, this horrific kind of abuse, I mean, if you read the stories coming out from the very few trials that occurred, you actually read stuff that you can't believe happened in Britain in modern times. It's just shocking. But to me, what's really shocking is the level of trying or to obliterate the issue, which has been pushed by local politicians. And again, I have another picture here that shows you the extent of the issue from a political point of view. Daniel, can you share the other pictures that shows you who's the political party in charge in the areas where this issue occurred? I mean, that's a slam dunk, isn't it? So you can see how the Labour Party, the left, has allowed these areas to be effectively dominated by the people who are free to do what they want. And the very same Labour Party doesn't want to talk about it because, highlighting the issue would be showing how the policies that they've been pushing, together with the Conservatives, to be honest, of multiculturalism, is actually dramatically failed and blown up on our face, really. We see the result of years, decades of gaslighting the local population, telling them, oh, you know, our society is much better for being diverse. Well, yes, it is, if diversity works in a synergetic way. If we all agree that the ideals of freedom and individual freedom are valid and everybody should be free to do what they want within limits, within the point where you start interfering with somebody else's freedom. So absolutely, I'm for cultural diversity up to the point where you don't start favoring a culture in favor of somebody else. Because these people actually see themselves protected. They know that nobody will ever touch them. They can do what they want because of their status of victim.
And that victim blaming as a way of covering up things, or encouraging people for the illusion of short-term social cohesion. And it is an illusion because it can only at some point, as perhaps it's beginning to do now with the spotlight that's being shone on it, it can only come to light in a bigger way at a later stage. And I think, well, let me ask you, Anders, because I'm curious as to whether you feel that this is the case in the US as well. Now, obviously, there are some differences between the multiculturalism in the UK and the way we approach it, and the way that the US, as far as I can see, attempts to make people, believe in America and Americanism at the point when they integrate into the country. So there's that aspect, and there's also the aspect that I wanted to ask about, which is whether the suppression of difficult questions is so prevalent in the US. Because here, the core of this issue is that people have been suppressed from highlighting this issue, from asking the questions without being smeared, called far right, called all sorts of things under the sun, and that shutting up the ability to actually approach the issue. Is that reflected in the US, to your knowledge, as well? Maybe on this issue, maybe on others?
I think it is to some extent. I don't think it is entrenched as it seems to be in Britain. And I think, if the pendulum swings too far in one direction, whether it's multiculturalism or wokeism or whatever, it seems like there is still a healthy pushback, as we can see, represented by the most recent election. Now, the more long-term cultural trends are still moving in the wrong direction, but towards more collectivism and altruism is kind of becoming more and more entrenched. But I think there is still a healthy dose of what's the term I'm looking for, of a sense of life, if you like, in the American people that is definitely different from what I experienced in my native Sweden, and I suspect that Britain is closer to other European countries in this sense. So yes, that is definitely there. Now, yeah, what was your first question? Sorry.
Well, I was just asking about whether things like the victim blaming, the short-termism of this kind of thing, whether it's trying to suppress questions means that things are going to blow up eventually anyway. And that's definitely what's been the case here. I mean, that must be reflected in the US as well, isn't it? The desire for, particularly in the case of things like questions like immigration, for things to be shut down for as a subject, because they're associated with certain elements of the political spectrum, means that people don't talk about it.
Yes, there's certainly that groupism or tribalism, if you like, that tends to shut up certain issues, both on the left and the right. You can't talk about it, or you shouldn't talk about it. But again, there is not enough cohesiveness to keep the lid on for too long, in my estimate. Now, I do want to say that again, when you talked about competing or cultures and the cultural expressions, and how it's important, I think, there again to point out how that is becoming cemented under welfare statism with this group orientation in general. In a free market under capitalism, cultures compete, not only on food. We can see, I mean, food is one area where it actually works pretty well. And there's a lot of, there's a reason why we don't see too much Tibetan food or from certain cultures, because people don't like it. And no offense to the Tibetans, but yak milk is not at the top of my list. But Indian, Italian foods and whatever is competing, and nobody has an issue with it. It's not like we're getting up in arms because of the dominance of pizza and pasta over some other group's preferred cuisine. And that's how, in a free market culture, all cultural issues would work themselves out, whether that is language, whether it's religion, whatever it is, and whatever is preferred by people is what wins out. Or there will be minorities, there will be majorities. But when there is no government, they're pushing the one side or the other. It's not a threat to anybody, and they mostly peacefully coexist.
I wanted to thank Jeff Bannister for the super chat. Thank you very much, Jeff. Jeff says, the Fabian Society created the mold. Citizens who felt it was their duty jumped in to become part of their creation. Are they still happy with the result? Well, yeah, good question, Jeff.
Well, I mean, for experience, I can tell you that most of these lefties, most of the people who have experienced diversity on the skin, are actually choosing, for example, to leave London for smaller places where diversity is a bit less. People, flock from places like Hackney in London, where there is a big diversity in population, to places like Winchester or Brighton, where they find themselves in a more traditional English setting, where diversity is a bit less. They do this because clearly they don't like the effect that their policies it translates into their real life. That's why lots of people are moving from the cities, but even small centers now are becoming more and more affected by these issues, because we got to a critical mass when you have enough immigration in small places to affect people on the ground as well. And until now was really an issue in mainly big urban centers where cultural diversity, ethnic diversity was much higher. And that's where the first flares occurred. But now it's a countrywide issue. Now as I mentioned, the critical mass is such that everywhere will have an issue. Initially, the first kind of little attempt to investigate these things threw up a few locations, mainly in the Midlands. But GB News, for example, has done a wider investigation and identified at least 50 different towns, all across the country. So this has become a bigger issue. And as I mentioned earlier on, the big issue here is actually the level of corruption in our institutions. and how much people here in Britain are willing to shut up and put up and not care about individual rights or the people who are actually the victims of these crimes. And as Anders mentioned, it's quite important to the fact that the state is driving most of these issues. The amount of benefits, welfare payments, and all this kind of stuff is put in front of the need of the victims. They need to follow policies and show certain results in terms of cultural and social cohesion are put in front of the actually happiness of the people living in Britain. Citizens are seen as an instrument of the state, which has to be seen as the big cultural happy place where statistics show that everything is fine, when actually on the ground it's not. And people hiding this are not only helping the groups that perpetrate this kind of crimes, not only helping the criminals themselves, but they're actively acting against the victims.
Yeah. I mean, certainly that level of cowardice that's been on display, the level of fact that people want to retain power and therefore they don't actually care if things are working properly. And of course, just the cultural vacuum that means that you're not celebrating your own standard of value. You're leaving this emptiness and you're filling it with vague notions such as single words like diversity with no basis to understanding what it means or what your own culture really represents. I think that's left a lot of problems here. And I think a lot of the other issue here is that those people who have been speaking it are not necessarily the best advocates for focusing on any issue. Because although they may be right about the need to focus on this issue or the nature of the problem to some extent, they're sometimes right for the wrong reasons. Now, Alejandro, do you think this being right for the wrong reasons, whether it's the far right characters that get brought up as representatives of this, or whether it's the more recent form of that, which is taking somebody like Elon Musk and saying he's a conspiracy theorist, he pops out of the woods with whatever's popped into his head lately without necessarily knowledge of it. He's not a good advocate for understanding the full issue, perhaps. Is being right for the wrong reasons not helping us to get to the root of this problem?
Well, I think I would challenge the notion of being right for the good reasons as such. Namely, and if maybe the way that I could refer to, and the article I would refer to, is to Leonard Peikoff's fact and value. That is, if you don't have your facts well established and your values well established on facts, then there's no such thing as being right for the wrong reasons. You only have to be right for the right reasons. The other thing, the other way around is a contradiction in itself. But I do think that in the better part and in the better people, there should be concern, and I do think that there is concern for the better part and for the better people. The way that this case has been erupting again is a good opportunity, and I think the reason it's been highlighting, and it's because I think several of people who don't want this to happen again, who are interested in the individuals and individual rights, want to see more and know more about what's happening, and want to pressure the government against it. Yes, there are people who have a really nefarious agenda who will also try to press against that and know against that. I think it would be very healthy to distance ourselves from them. And maybe linking that to the Fabian's comment, I think that this is indeed a world that has lacked any respect for individuals and that respect has been eroding over the last 200 years. Even when you saw dim reaction in the 1980s against the people who espoused collectivism and more socialism, what you really saw in in the movements of people like Hayek and Friedman was that they allowed people to grant freedom, but only because they thought that that would bring better opportunities to the wider people. Their care wasn't on individuals. Their care wasn't on people being better because they're individuals. And I think in this regard, that has evolved and taken apart a lot of the psyche of thinking about justice as an individual phenomenon and something that you should be taking into account for um, persons rather than just collectives. And we should, one of the ways by which we could stand against these monstrosities that we've been talking about is thinking about people as individuals and justice for individuals as well.
Yeah. And this is one of the issues we are facing now. I mean, sectarian politics is exactly the opposite of individual freedom, putting the individual first. These people are putting their group, their religion, their whatever state they're wallowing as the main feature that represents their group. Their group suddenly overrides the individual freedoms. And by presenting himself on the political stage as representative of the group, they can push more stuff towards a more collectivized society, can they? We've seen the issue of sectarian politics here in Britain following the kind of split from some pro-Palestinian candidates from the Labour Party. Again, the Labour Party is the Labour that monopolized the Muslim vote, really. And so when we had this issue that the Labour Party wasn't apparently addressing hardly enough, they weren't being anti-Semitic enough, factions from the political landscape split off the Labour Party, set up as independent, and won a few 5-6 seats in Parliament. And we're seeing the same thing going on in America, haven't we? With the various candidates who split, who came off the vote for the Democrats and voted against Kamala Harris, even though she was literally pandering for the vote, wasn't she? Anders, how do you think this issue, this new sectarian vote, this kind of movement towards a more collectivist politics really is coming off in America? Do you think that that's the kind of direction we're going to go through? Do you think the result of the latest election will make sure that this is not happening?
No, I don't think the recent election will make sure. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic that we will see some action taken that will buy us time, if you like, to keep the economy humming and to avoid a disaster. But whether we have a Democrats in the White House and Congress or conservatives right now is not really changing the long-term trend. They're both collectivists at their core, with a few individual exceptions, obviously. So, and what we have seen now is that the Republican Party is turning into a populist version of the Democrats, and there are people who are migrating from Democrats to Republicans. A lot of the blue collar vote and the Hispanic vote and the black vote. I mean, they're still in a minority, but that minority got a lot bigger in the recent election. So no, there is no. I don't see a major trend against collectivism. I mean, it's us on this show and a few thousand of us, but again, majorities don't determine the fate of the world. So, we just have to keep fighting, and it's registering, definitely. And we know that Ayn Rand is out there in the mainstream, and plug her books. That's the easiest way to get people interested. And then obviously promote your fellow moral crusaders.
Thank you. And thank you to Jonathan Honig for your super chat as well. Appreciate it. I think one of the key elements to what does it mean to be British that is sometimes brought up in the vagueness of what people understand that to mean in the first place, which is very different to the sense of life of the US. One of those things that does exist, to a lesser extent than it used to, is the notion of fair play and of justice. And one of the key elements of justice is that it's universally applied. I mean, Alejandro, do you think that there are many ways which I think this is relevant to focus on? You could focus on the fact, for example, that in the US, with like BLM and things like that, that there has been also a racial element to whether laws and crimes are pursued to the same extent depending on the ethnic makeup of the perpetrator, whether that's a theft or violence or whatever. And then there's also the fact that fairness, people are prepared to treat people decently if they behave decently. So treating all immigrants as if they're the kind of immigrants that we're talking about and these horrendous crimes here is wholly unfair. And yet that can end up being the direction that people go in when the impression they're given is of the worst examples. What are your thoughts?
So I don't know if you want to let me start answering your question and tell me if that's where you want me to go. So you and I were talking privately a couple of weeks ago about some questions on what does it mean to be British because of the citizenship tests that we have here. And as you say, on the one hand, one of the things that they tell you is, hey, you have to respect the law, you have to care for justice, that everyone is treated equally. And then one of the things that they ask you is, hey, we care that everyone has there's this kind of equality, or what today is being called more equity treatment from everyone. And I think that's a contradiction in itself. And indeed, one of the core clashes that you are seeing today is that on the one hand, you are asking for people who see that this is truly unfair, people who aren't treated properly and in being subject to due process, due investigation, because they have a very specific ethnic background, and therefore politicians don't want that to spark any problem. And what's happening over there is that the concept of fairness or equity or whatever you want to call it, like, is that it's trumping the concept of real justice. Justice means treating people as they deserve to be treated, and to see them as individuals, not as part of a collective. And here, with fairness, with equity, with anything like that, you just grab a specific tribe and you judge tribes as such, and that is completely wrong. I don't know if that's what you were trying to take me, Richard.
Well, I'm happy for you to go wherever you choose, but yeah, no, absolutely, it's a good point, well made. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan, for another super chat. And we've got the Atlas Shrugged book club for members coming up soon. So, Anders, closing remark, and how can people find out more about you and your book?
Yeah, my book is available on Amazon in all countries where Amazon is available. The title is Think Right or Wrong, not Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right, a 21st Century Citizen Guide. And you can find me on Substack at andersingemarsson.substack.com.
Thank you, Anders. And Alejandro, any closing remarks you want to make about the whole topic, and also where people can find some of your work, maybe on ARCUK?
Just, I think maybe this is a fight worth fighting for. This is a true case of injustice. Let's keep thinking about this. I hope that there are some improvements going forward. That's the only comments I have. Where can people look more about my content? I've written a couple of Substacks for the Ayn Rand Center UK Substack. If you want to know about a bit more about Millet's, the things that I see that might be wrong with Millet, specifically about his character, you can read the essay over there. If you are interested in why escalation is a completely improper concept, you can go over there as well. And as well, you, Richard, and Marco have done an excellent job as well. So maybe you can pitch it as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we've written a number of articles as well on the Substack. So there's now quite a variety on there of different types of topics, some light-hearted, some, you know, super extensive in their depth, and lots of variety in there, all sorts of subjects. So please do check it out. And of course, members at the gold level and above get access to the Super Stack as well, which is another benefit to joining at that level. So please consider joining at any level of ARCUK membership for all the added benefits that it provides.
And also check out the sister channel to ARCUK, which is the Briefly Objective, where you can find show content, show videos, and you can share on your social media and just watch.
And I doubt this subject is going anywhere, and we hoped in many ways that it isn't going anywhere, certainly not back under the rug, so that this topic can be properly, you know, progressed. And we'll be covering it, of course, on this channel as that happens. So thank you very much to both Anders, to Alejandro, to our super chatters, to everyone, and we'll be back tomorrow for the Daily Objective and the reality show. And next up is the Atlas Shrugged Book Club. So if you remember, join us for that too. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.